Hey, what's up, hello everyone, welcome back to another season 2 of SimplyPodLogical, a Simply Nailogical podcast.
Guess who's back? Back again.
We're two furious. The last of Podlogical Part 2. If we were a movie, if this podcast was a movie and it had a sequel for no reason.
This is The Matrix Revolutions? Is that what it was called?
SimplyPodLogical Revolutions, Resurrections, something like that.
We've come back
from
after
the dead.
A couple weeks of a hiatus in between our season. Our first season was like 2 years long, but here we are. And yeah, we're doing good. We missed this place.
We did?
This room in our house. I mean, I did. I missed it. I like how it's dark and cozy.
I kind of miss it. I miss talking to you. Cristine and I haven't spoken to each other in about 4 weeks.
Yeah, so we thought it was time. It's been a while, so we're gonna talk to each other.
Yeah, we
today.
only talk to each other on the podcast, so it's been a while since we've spoken.
But hope you guys have been doing well. We're glad to be back. We have a fun topic today. But first, you want to talk about what did we do the last 3 weeks? Yeah,
what did we do? What did you do?
The same as usual, I guess, minus this.
Nothing changed.
Yeah, nothing changed. Just
I started playing Donkey Kong again.
That's new.
I'm playing a little bit of Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's a good thing.
Why?
Or if that's like regression.
Oh.
Maybe I'm in that point in my life. This might be like a midlife crisis sort of period of time for me, right?
It's about that age. How old are you turning? 35?
I'm going to be 35.
March 31st? I was going to on April 1st. I keep thinking of April 1st as like the day things change.
I was almost born on April Fool's.
You were almost
But my grandmother was like,
no jokes.
pray to Jesus he is not an April Fool's baby, because that would be a very silly baby, a very silly day to have a baby.
And now you're definitely not silly because you were born just the day before.
I'm a very serious person.
Yeah. Oh my God.
You better believe it. I caught up in some, we've been watching a little bit of TV. Mm-hmm. I'm watching some shows. We started watching a show about the people going to the moon. That's fun.
Yeah. What's
for
that
all
called?
mankind,
For all
I think.
mankind.
So I don't mean to embarrass you, but something kind of funny about the show.
What?
So we're like 5 episodes in, and Cristine goes. So the premise of the show is it's an alternate history or timeline if the Russians landed on the moon first. Mm-hmm. We're a few episodes in, and Christine's like, this doesn't seem historically accurate to me.
Yeah, because I have to defend myself. I wasn't really paying attention to the first few episodes. I was passively watching it, but I was on my phone, so I wasn't really watching it.
Yeah.
And then, but I just assumed it was like a documentary, or a recreation of like real life events.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not what happened, right? Like, what?
The Russians landed a woman on the moon?
But then you're like, no, it's not real. I'm like, oh, shit.
Fun. Good show, though.
Yeah.
Shout out Apple TV. But so we watched that. Obviously, we're watching The Last of Us.
Yeah.
I've talked about this on stream. I think next week, our next podcast might be just about The Last of Us because the finale will have just aired.
And we'll want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So we should do that on the podcast.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way we talk to each other.
Yeah.
Okay. What have you been doing?
I've been watching, Holo Taco usual. We just launched the One Chrome collection, so there's that. Mm-hmm. And in between all that stuff, in my spare time, I guess I'm continuing to watch Trials. And that's kind of been on my mind lately because this goes to our topic of today's podcast. But I've been watching the Alex Murdaugh trial, which just concluded recently. And lots of people have lots of thoughts. It was a very high-profile case, and it has been live streamed on YouTube from all sorts of different channels, just like watching the trial proceedings for like the last 6 weeks. And then they just did sentencing like the day after it concluded. Yeah,
this might be the most watched trial on YouTube since the very gross spectacle of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard civil suit. This is a criminal trial of a lawyer from South Carolina who is accused of murdering his wife and child. A Netflix series just came out about it a week ago before there was a verdict in the trial.
Yeah.
And he was just convicted as, spoiler alert, we're saying this like it's a story. He was found guilty.
He was found guilty
by a jury of murdering his wife and kid. Mm-hmm. So we want to talk. I think our energy in the podcast these days is just like, things are interesting to us. We want to talk about it.
Yeah, things are interesting. It's not meant to we're not trying to cause arguments or change reality, but I like to unpack things. I like to explore, how people think
like
things.
hearing people talk about things they're interested in.
That's why you're here, right? To hear us talk about something or whatever
Sure.
we think.
Yeah. Why? So why did you find interesting about it, or why did you want to talk about it?
So I just really like trials. I like watching them. I like also kind of imagining what it would be like to be on that jury if it's a jury trial and understand what are the jury instructions. But when you're watching the live stream, you have the added advantage, or if you want to look at it that way, of seeing the motions and kind of the discussion between defense attorneys and prosecution and the judge that excludes the jury, because there's a lot more that the public watching on live stream saw of this trial or any trial than the jury saw. So I just also think that there's something really interesting there. And of course, everyone wants to weigh in on an opinion. Everyone decides I'm convinced he did it. And they said that a week into the evidence, or I'm convinced he didn't do it because I didn't see enough evidence. Everyone has a different perspective. And I just find that really fascinating, because ultimately what happens is you have a jury of 12 people. We're talking about in the States. This is also true in Canada though, but just generally for context, that's the adversarial system in North America, generally speaking. But I just find it interesting that you're going to end up, if you're on trial for murder and you have a jury trial with 12 average people, because the whole point is it's a jury of your peers, people from your region, if you're trying the case in that area, who may or may not decide one way or the other. And you would think, or it's supposed to be based on the juries following the evidence or following the law presented to them. But at the end of the day, when you really think about it, it's kind of a crapshoot, depending on who you get.
It's kind of insane that just here's a bunch of regular folks we found who are going to decide your fate. Yeah. I mean, we could talk a little bit about the purpose of juries and things so we have a background in criminology. I'm not going to say either of us are experts in jury decision making, or me especially, that's not something I ever really took an interest in specifically.
I took a 4th-year class in jury decision-making specifically, but that does not make me an expert. But we have a baseline education in criminology.
Yeah, and I feel I don't know if I can offer an answer almost for you. Is I feel because our background's in criminology, but we no longer do work on a day-to-day basis that is about crime and justice policy or statistics or anything like that, it does feel like sometimes we gravitate towards media that is about the criminal justice system or processes.
Because I think we're interested
just because it's a thing
topic,
we were interested in and spent a big part of our lives thinking about we might
years.
be involved in. Yeah.
15 years of our lives were either in school or in justice statistics or something.
All right, can I ask you I was going to say leading question, but here I'll frame
leading.
it exactly. Okay. If you killed somebody, let's say you murdered somebody.
Okay.
Would you want a jury, or would you want some judge?
Well, it depends.
Experienced
because
judge.
if it's a question of law, if there's a loophole in the law, loophole is not the right word. But if there's something that's well, technically it wasn't this offense because it doesn't meet the criteria, then you want a judge. But if you have a lot of mitigating circumstances, meaning there's an emotional reason why you did it and you'd think the average person would sympathize with you, then you want a jury.
Yeah. But what if you have a terrible reputation, your whole town hates you?
Well, that would be pretrial publicity.
You probably, if all your peers hate you, you probably don't want your
probably
peers.
Don't want a jury of your peers. You would probably move to have it to have the trial held in a different jurisdiction, which apparently is what generally happens if you're known in your community, so that there isn't that pretrial publicity or just bias of the juror pool. So you could just move to another region where no one knows you. But that's not what happened in the Alex Murdaugh case. Maybe we should give just a little bit more background. So he was a known prosecutor, and he comes from a family of prosecutors in the state.
His granddaddy was
of South Carolina. His grandfather's pictures hanging in the same courtroom where he was tried. And then the judge commented that he had to take down that picture because it would cause juror bias.
Okay.
Yeah.
So by prosecutor, sorry, explain what that role really means. He's deciding in that jurisdiction.
Yeah. So I don't even remember his actual title, but his family was the prosecutor, meaning they are the ones who charge offenders with crimes and then they prosecute them in court, meaning they like always move to find someone guilty. It's like the Crown in Canada. We call it the Crown here.
Yeah, but it's not like some guy just in an office alone deciding who's guilty of things. Like police are laying charges. And
sorry, the police lays the charge and then they bring the charge to the court, and then it's either a judge or a jury who decides whether they're going to get that conviction or not. But, you know, the prosecutor's role is generally to prosecute crimes and to secure a guilty conviction if there's enough evidence and probable cause to believe that that person is guilty.
So there is definitely something salacious about the fact that this guy, who had been in the position of prosecuting people,
is now being prosecuted
through generations in his family, is now sitting in that box charged with multiple counts of murder.
And I think it's also important context that that's not the only thing he's been charged with. There's like 99 other indictments related to financial fraud and crime and a bunch of other things that have kind of come up to the surface in the last couple of years. So it's not just that. The family has a very long, complicated history, but specifically him, tied to him. So there's a lot of other stuff out there if you're interested.
I think the sort of very too long didn't read context you probably need is that like that's a powerful family in that area, and like
rich,
a rich family. And when, you know, his son got drunk and drove a boat and crashed it and a girl got killed, the dad was doing things allegedly to make sure his kid didn't get charged or wasn't held liable. Like there's still a pending civil case about that boat accident
except
too, right?
Paul is deceased now, so he will not personally be able to be sued. And now Alec has been sentenced to custody for the rest of his life. He got 2 consecutive life sentences for the murder of his son and wife. So like you're not going to get any money really out of him if that was part of the goal.
The point is just like powerful family, maybe corrupt or using their influence to get themselves out of things. And he had stolen millions of dollars from clients in his capacity as a lawyer. Yes. Like I don't think we're not the people to talk to if you just want to hear about the facts of this case. That's not why you're here.
Good point. So we'll stop recapping it.
let's stop doing that. I think we were just interested in the case itself. What I was interested in, I started watching it because you were watching it. And I did not think there was really credible evidence that he actually killed them. I think he lied about where he was. I think he was evasive. I think he seems like a terrible person. But I didn't hear anything. I heard evidence that he was, he was there right around the time they were killed, and he lied about it. That's the closest thing I think you got to evidence that he killed them. And I guess the jury decided that was enough. But it really begs that question. So if you need to feel like it has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that this guy killed his wife and child, is that established by just knowing he was there around the time they were killed?
These are really great questions. And I think there's a lot to unpack here because just socially and generally speaking as people, when you see that someone is accused of something, and there's a lot of people upset because that person has done a lot of harm in the community. And in this case, there was a lot of that beyond just the murder of these 2 people. But there was a lot of other like upset that Alec had done. And there was definitely evidence of. People are waiting for the win. And I'm not talking about the jury. I mean, like people in general want the win. They want to, they so eagerly want to hear guilty, to find that it kind of makes for this strange celebration when it happens, and people are rooting for it even without evidence because they just say that they know he did it. They believe that he did it even without evidence. So I find that piece really interesting because I paid attention. I watched, I'd say like 95% of the trial. I can't say I, like every single minute absorb, but I watched it and I watched legal commentary on it as well. Shout out to Emily D. Baker. I do enjoy legal commentary a lot. And I found it really hard as well with the evidence presented, and we had the advantage of evidence that was not given to the jury that was declared inadmissible that like maybe you could help use as evidence. I found it hard to say like, yes, there is evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it. So if I'm in that room, and this is all just personal opinion, because it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, the jury is the one who comes to the decision, and that's their right. And that's the legal system and the adversarial system. But I struggled as well. I was like, I don't have enough to say personally that I can convict him because the evidence is too circumstantial for me. And circumstantial evidence means you can't actually place the murder weapon in their hand. It's just like the circumstances around it that could lead you to believe and convict, because you can convict on circumstantial evidence. But it's really just like you taking all the circumstances and deciding that the sum of that equals guilty. And some of the jurors did speak out on media afterwards. They don't have to, but some were interviewed. And when asked by reporters, like, how did you guys decide that he was guilty?
Well, we prayed about it.
Well, okay, well, I wasn't going to go there. But like one of them at least said that they just knew he was lying, that they knew he was lying.
Well, he was a liar.
Because he lied all the time.
He was a proven liar.
He was a proven liar.
Habitual liar.
So they extrapolated the fact that there was so much evidence of him lying about financial crimes and drug use and that kind of thing.
Well, and being there when the murders happened.
And being, yes, that he must have done it. To me, that does not mean he did it. It means there's a lot of circumstantial evidence and he's a liar.
Yeah,
I don't know
how much circumstantial evidence until it's basically beyond a reasonable doubt, I guess, is an interesting
That's a good question, and that's why you have a jury of 12 kind of together decide which way they're gonna go. And apparently, this juror said that all but 2 initially, when they took like a roll call, said guilty, and 2 said not guilty. Or sorry, maybe it was 2 not guilty, 1 undecided, and then it took them 45 minutes to convince the other 2 juries that he's guilty. They've also been there for 6 weeks.
Because if they hadn't all agreed, that would be a hung jury. And
no, I think, based on listening to legal commentary about this, that they would have come back to the judge and said, we can't make a decision. The judge would have said, go back and try again. And the point is, like, the judge isn't going to just, like, let you hang so easily. And then over time, usually what happens is they tend to, like, flip jurors.
Yeah. And we're talking about, a bunch of people. They've already been there for 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. If they're getting paid at all, it's like a
small stipend, and maybe their employer substitutes some of it, maybe not. But these are not like rich people who can afford to take weeks off.
It kind of fucks up your life to be selected for jury duty in a case like this, right? And most cases do not. This isn't your typical case,
right?
If you get selected for jury duty. And sorry, just to go back to like my opinion, we'll never know what really happened, right? Mm-hmm. We'll have to live with that.
Well, yes, but a lot of people will say, no, he was found guilty, so that is the fact. And we have to still respect that in this kind of system, this is what happens. A jury decides, and you respect it because that was their civic duty.
Why do I have to respect it?
I mean, I just don't want us to be like the legal system is flawed because we don't think juries made the right decision. The whole point of it is that you have a jury of your peers, and that is the point of the adversarial system, that you do give respect to whatever the jury decides.
But we're not, representatives of the state here. We're just talking about the legal process, and we can be critical of it.
Sure, but the point of the adversarial system is it's supposed to involve regular people to help make those decisions. Mm-hmm. And that's supposed to mean less corruption.
Okay. What I was going to say is I think on a balance of probabilities.
In a civil case,
I think he probably did it.
Do you want to explain what a balance of probability means? Or just the difference between that and reasonable doubt? Beyond a reasonable doubt.
If you think it is more likely that he did it than he didn't do it, then at least in the Canadian context, he could be held civilly liable. This is kind of like the O.J. Simpson case, right? He was found not guilty in the criminal case of murdering Nicole Simpson, his wife. But when the family sued him civilly, they won a judgment and got a bunch of money.
Yeah.
So I could have seen the same thing playing out here, that given all the circumstantial evidence, it is most likely that you did do this or were at least involved in it, right?
Or at least knew something. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas for me, it really comes down to how you define beyond a reasonable doubt. Mm-hmm. Like if you think there's a 1% chance someone didn't do it, is that a reasonable doubt?
Yes.
Is it?
Technically, yes. If you think there's a chance, and they had that in some of the instructions.
There's always a chance someone didn't do it.
There isn't.
There's a chance a rock falls out of the sky and kills somebody, you know?
But in other cases, there's clear and convincing evidence that the defendant, did the crime. Maybe there's video footage, that you have the murder weapon, you have a few eyewitnesses. Most cases, or not most, I'm not going to say most. A lot of cases do have clear and convincing evidence that there's no question. But this one did not. I don't think it had clear and convincing evidence. I think there was a lot of circumstantial evidence.
That was very difficult to ignore.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
But a jury is allowed to take that circumstantial evidence and decide still that beyond a reasonable doubt they are convinced that he did the crime.
My memory of like juries and where juries are useful in a criminal justice system, because I think most of the time I think I prefer the idea of a judge who understands the law just trying to apply it in a way that's as unbiased as possible. I think that makes sense in most contexts. I've always thought of juries as like, if you do have an exceptional case where it would just be unconscionable or unjust for just the letter of the law to be applied or followed,
then you want a jury.
You want a jury. Like if someone, before euthanasia was, maybe legalized in a jurisdiction, someone mercy kills somebody, you might have a jury of their peers being like, there's no way we're convicting this guy of first-degree murder for that, right? Like, I feel like there's a high-profile Canadian case that's sort of thrown around about this, actually.
Right, there is.
And so that's sort of my memory of like, oh, if I'm a defendant, but I feel like I have a very
a mitigating factor,
human really, or sort of emotional justification that just a pure legal process wouldn't respect or recognize, but maybe a collective of representatives of society, and society would express its values through the jury, right? But other than that, I don't see why jury trials are so... I don't know how common they are, but I don't see why they would really be common outside of those circumstances.
So, at least in North Carolina, because I was trying to figure out why did he pick a jury trial. This must vary state to state, but I think in a lot of cases that you have the right to a jury trial as a defendant, and that's part of your like constitutional rights in the States, where you have the right to be tried by a jury of your peers. It gives the air of more impartiality, less room for corruption, to be tried by like people in your community as opposed to the judge. And you could argue that there's
less
more
corruption.
Bias in there.
There's potential for corruption with juries.
Yes, but it's less likely because you would hope that they're just picking, random people off the street, so to speak. And like, that's kind of the point, right? It's always a different jury. It's never like the same people over and over. So if you're a judge kind of doing that on the regular, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's stories of corruption there. But the point is you have a right. It's part of your right to be tried by a jury of your peers. So that's why. And I think in some cases you can choose to waive that right, and then you get that judge trial. In this case, Alec, I guess, did not choose to waive it. I was trying to find an answer. I could not find it because all the coverage is just about the verdict. But
you would think if you're a guy who is like very powerful in your community, seen as a corrupt figure who had stolen money from people, and don't you think?
I don't know.
I wonder if it actually had an effect on the trial, that his personal reputation was just awful. Right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because he could have made a move, I guess, to try and have the trial heard in another jurisdiction because of that pretrial publicity where just like everyone knows who he is in that community, but they didn't. And I wonder if maybe part of that, I'm just guessing, maybe part of that reason is so many of the defense witnesses were from that area, so it makes it really inconvenient for people to participate too if they're going to be your witnesses. But maybe there's also the element of the internet. If they knew that it was going to be streamed, it would be impossible. And this is another question that I think about all the time, and I don't know why. These days, when you're on a jury in the States, and you're asked whether you have any knowledge about a very I'm just talking about high profile cases, and you're like, no, I know nothing. But then you got to go home every night and not look at it on Twitter, not ignore it when you see it on the news, tell people you can't talk about it when someone's just casually talking about it.
That's not really happening, right?
But that's what is supposed to happen, is those things not happen. And we're just living in an era where it's logistically impossible, and you can't sequester people because that's just cruel. Like, you can't take their phones away for 6 weeks. That's not happening.
Well, in certain cases they do sequester juries, but is that usually during...
I thought that's just like when they're deliberating.
Maybe, yeah.
But I don't really know. There's probably changing rules.
But I hear you. It's increasingly impossible for juries not to be exposed, especially when you're talking about high-profile cases that involve celebrities or just high-profile figures, right?
And even if you could control for that, there's always still going to be some level of implicit bias in jurors, just as there is in all of us, in all of our everyday decisions.
Oh, sure. Well, that's just baked into the system. Yeah. That's what you just get that if you pick a jury. Right?
Yeah. I mean, you can try and control for it by like kicking jurors out.
Oh, actually, so this is interesting. Did you watch the jury selection process, or did they only air the
I don't
trial
think they
itself?
air that.
Okay.
Yeah. To my understanding, I don't think they aired that stuff.
Because I know this is also sort of a controversial thing in things academics study, or like, I don't want to say her name. The professor, SimplyPodLogical, a lot of her expertise and research was in jury decision making and jury selection, I think. Because, there's a very there's procedures for selecting juries. And part of it is just like you get preemptory challenges. Is that the term for it?
Well, it's
where you can just like outright disqualify somebody for no reason.
A peremptory challenge, where you don't need to give a reason. But that's in the process of voir dire, which in the States is like you do those kind of selection things, but you're like asking them basically if they're biased. Like, could you be impartial if you were on a case about XYZ? You know, do you have children of this age? And maybe it involves children of that age, the case. Like, things like that basically try and ask the jury if they're going to be biased.
So like, in theory, it's supposed to be about determining that these jurors are impartial and can serve that function. But what we see happen in practice a lot of the time is like, if you see a lot of like, if I have a defendant who is of a certain minority group, and I'm the prosecution, I might want to just get rid of jurors who look like or identify with that person.
Yep.
And so you could argue there's like racism going on in just the sort of function of how they're challenging who should be a juror in the first place, right? So I feel like there's a pretty broken system going on there already.
Yeah, there's a lot of research on this and how to prevent that. And there's like certain laws that have attempted to be passed to prevent that. So you can't just discriminate on the basis of race when you're doing peremptory challenges, if they can prove that. But it's a little bit out of our depth and expertise, but this is like a field of study. Like, people literally specialize in jury decision making and jury selection. And it's quite fascinating that at the end of the day, like, it's trying to assemble a group of 12 people that look like the people in that community, or look and think like the people in that community.
Yeah, what does it even mean for someone to be your peers at this stage in such a global...
It doesn't mean you're friends. When they say a jury of your peers,
I want
does not mean you're
people
friends.
who like hummus. They like playing video games. Like, they need to check a lot of boxes for me to consider them my peer.
Right. Yes.
They can't be beneath me, you know?
Do you think you would be an impartial juror?
Well, I think that's kind of impossible. But that's the point of being a juror, right? Isn't it?
To be impartial? I mean, you would hope. Like, the goal is, I think, the intent is that the 12 people serving on the jury don't have obvious predisposed biases that are going to either be in favor of the prosecution or the defense without listening to the case facts. It's the case facts and you thinking about them and deliberating with your peers that should give way to the decision, not anything you're bringing into the courtroom with you.
Yes.
However, humanity.
I think I could be an effective juror, but I'm not going to pretend
like you're totally
like anyone
biased.
else that we do not have any sort of implicit or inherent biases.
Do you think that you'd be more likely to convict or acquit? Just very generally speaking. Just like, what's your lean if you were leaning one direction?
I don't really think of it that way.
I'm oversimplifying, but...
Yeah, no. I don't know. So do you want to? This is our next part of the podcast, right? We want to
because we're gonna find out.
What are we gonna do? Are we doing a quiz, Cristine?
Yeah, we're gonna find out what our pretrial juror attitudes are because I found a questionnaire written by some researchers who specialize in this.
My guess is that I'm going to land have a little bit more of a tendency to punish than you do. It seems to me you are very robotically follow the rules, no emotion.
But that could also mean punish. If I'm following the rules, I could just follow the book of law. Yeah, but that doesn't
even what you've said in the last half hour about like even if there's a 1% chance someone didn't do it, that's reasonable doubt. I think it seems to me you err very much on the side of preventing false convictions, maybe more than
I think false positives, false convictions, wrongful convictions in the justice system should be avoided at all costs. I really do. I'm not saying let everyone go because you can never be 100% sure unless there's like video evidence. That's not my position either. But I do think everything in these huge decisions require careful consideration. So do you want to take a quiz?
Okay. Not really, but okay.
This is for entertainment purposes. Obviously.
You think you need a disclaimer on that?
I don't know. I found it on the internet. It was published in a research journal in 2010. It's not really an online quiz. I adapted these scales into a quiz, but that's not really the way it's supposed to be used. I'll just say that. Like they use it to do like interrated validity and like evaluating different scales and how they work together.
But so the end result will be we each get a score that says who is more likely to convict people.
Yeah. So in this case, it's called the Pretrial Juror Attitudes Questionnaire. It's a 29-item inventory, so 29 questions, and a higher score denotes a prosecution bias. So I'm going to ask us 29 different statements, and we have to pick between 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree. So it's just a Likert scale, and you're going to tell me, and then it's going to do the math, and it's going to score us. 5
strongly agree. 1
strongly disagree. So let's try and do this somewhat quickish.
Yeah.
Okay. Without overthinking, can we do it?
Oh, 3 hours later.
All right. If a suspect runs from police, then he probably committed the crime. 1, strongly disagree. 5, strongly agree. So this is all you have. That's the only information you have.
Ran from police? It's not a good sign. What are you giving it? Give it a score. We said we're not overthinking.
I'm going to say I'm strongly disagree. Can I explain very quickly? Because just because someone runs from police is not evidence enough for me to convict them.
Well, no, that alone isn't evidence. But is it more likely to make me think they are guilty of something?
It says then he probably committed the crime.
Probably. So, okay. I never ran from. I'm giving it at least a 2.
So you slightly disagree, or are you neutral? Because you kind of probably.
Is 3 neutral?
I mean, it would be in the middle between 1 and 5. So yes.
If 3 is neutral, then I'm a 4. It makes me think I'm slightly more inclined to think they are guilty.
So then you are 4.
Okay, I'm a 4.
So I'm going to put 4. All right.
So 3 is like I don't have an opinion on it, basically.
Well, 3 is like I'm in between disagree and agree.
Because 4 seems like a high score for me just being like, I'm slightly more inclined to think he was running away for a reason.
Okay. That's, yeah. All right. Okay. A defendant should be found guilty if 11 out of 12 jurors vote guilty.
So it's saying, do you think it's unfair that 1 juror
held out? So should the majority win? Should the majority be able to overrule the last juror?
I'm going to go 4 for that as well.
You're going to say 4?
Yeah, you know what? Because I think sometimes there's just one idiot in the room.
But are they an
everybody idiot? Problems?
Okay, yeah. I'm going to say 2 because I disagree because this goes against the whole principle of the system. And if the judge wanted, he could become the 13th juror and overrule it if it was that fucked up.
Oh, okay.
Trick question. No.
Question 3.
Okay, but this also again, just reiterating, we have degrees in criminology. So our understanding... No, but like...
We've no expertise in this.
But the way we think about these questions is going to be different because we learned about them. Like at some point.
We're special?
No, it's not. That's not what I mean. I just mean like...
I really hate that sort of like academic elitist position.
I really don't think it's elite. I think it provides context into like why we think so deeply about these questions rather than just, give an answer. That's all.
Okay. I don't think, maybe I'm not thinking that
Ben
deeply.
doesn't think deeply. Okay. Too often jurors hesitate to convict who is guilty out of pure sympathy. Too often jurors hesitate to convict someone.
I strongly disagree. People like getting revenge sometimes. People have a tendency to...
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I don't think people hesitate out of sympathy.
No.
So I'm also going to say 1. In most cases where the accused presents a strong defense, it is only because of a good lawyer. Where the accused presents a strong defense.
So I'm a 2. I disagree, but like there is a problem in the justice system of people being able to buy better defenses. Mm-hmm. So there's at least some truth to this idea that a good defense can be bought.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that you can buy a better lawyer in some cases. I mean, not if we're talking about like a public defender, because that's kind of controlled for. But you could just end up with a better lawyer sometimes. So I'll vote the same. Okay. Out of every 100 people brought to trial, at least 75 are guilty of the crime with which they are tried. Charged.
Fucking idea. What?
Yeah.
Strongly disagree.
Out of every 100 people brought to trial, at least 75 are guilty. So
show me the data.
So I looked at this before we did this.
Of course you did.
And it's like 50 to 60%. If we're just looking at Statistics Canada, criminal court, general, not segmenting by offenses.
So it doesn't shock me that it is a majority of people, because you would hope that it doesn't really make it to trial if there isn't a very reasonable chance of conviction.
And most cases will drop off between police and court anyways. So by the time they get to court, those are the ones where there's more clear and convincing evidence to have gone there.
So people get away with crimes all the time because it just doesn't go from the policing to the court system.
There is attrition. Yeah, there is a lot of drop off in between.
So that statement's actually not as crazy as it sounded at first. Read it again.
See, this is why I made the statement that I said earlier. Out of every 100 people brought to trial, at least 75 are guilty of the crime in which they are charged. I think I disagree with the sense that this person is just like convinced because they're here, they've got to be guilty. So at least most of them are. I think that's the wrong attitude. But if you actually look at the data, technically the majority, it's like 60 to 65%.
It's like if you're a juror
found guilty.
and you didn't pay attention and you're just at the end, you're like, well, there's a 75% chance this guy's guilty.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little bit lazy way to make a decision.
All right, give me a 3 on this one. Give me a 3.
Yeah, I think I'm going to say 3, even though there is some factual evidence to support this, but most people wouldn't be thinking about it that way. Okay. For serious crimes like murder, a defendant should be found guilty so long as there is a 90% chance that he committed the crime.
Oh.
A 90% chance. So 10% chance he didn't do it, but he should be found guilty.
If there's a 1 in 10 chance they didn't do it, that's not reasonable doubt. Is basically the supposition
they're saying
here.
Still convict, override.
No, I strongly disagree.
Me too. I do.
I think it's way worse to falsely convict someone than to know that some people are going to be getting away with serious crimes.
Interesting. There's going to be people who disagree with that statement. But yeah, I hear you. Also, you can't quantify this. You can't quantify that there's a 90% chance someone committed the crime. I know we were just kind of saying earlier, we're just 99% chance. You can't quantify this. So even the idea of saying that isn't really. Mm-hmm. Defense lawyers don't really care about guilt or innocence. They are just in the business to make money.
To make money? I don't think people become defense lawyers.
To make money and have a good time.
Well, a lot of people, I don't know, people have this idea of the glamorous lawyers representing millionaire clients or something. That exists, but that is not representative of the profession as a whole. Read the statement again.
Defense lawyers don't really care about guilt or innocence. They are just there to make money.
I actually agree more than you probably think with the first half of that.
But they don't care about guilt or innocence.
Yeah, I think there is in an adversarial system, I think it is so ingrained in the legal profession, at least in the criminal context, that it is just gamesmanship of what is the best argument in favor of my client or to defend my client or to prosecute this client, that I think even if they personally, in their heart of hearts, think their client did it, that really has no bearing on how they represent them. It's really sort of independent of truth. They're advocating. It's like it's sports.
When I've heard defense attorneys or former defense attorneys like on YouTube talk about this, I think it's interesting because they frame it as like, well, you know, it's not just about making sure my client gets off, you know, if you think he did it and I'm trying to get him out of a conviction. They're there to help protect every defendant's rights to their constitutional rights to have a fair trial. And you need an advocate to do that. So you need a defense lawyer who's looking out for your rights to make sure due process is followed. And I think some of the more respected ones, when they frame it that way, I totally see their point. And I feel like that's a really valid and fair way of looking at it. That like, they're not there thinking I'm going to get this guy off just because, and he did it. They're there because they're like, I got to, whatever the circumstances, I need to protect my client's right. I need to make sure due process is followed. You know, if I need to object to something to protect whatever it is, the integrity of the case, then I will. So I
understand that in principle that someone is entitled to the best possible defense under the law, but it seems I don't have to agree or like the fact that as a consequence of that, you'll just have defense attorneys that will withhold or ignore evidence that their client is clearly guilty, or still offer that defense to someone where they know they are guilty, right?
Yep.
So I actually kind of have an issue with, I guess, the adversarial system.
Like, what else do you do? We just, like, if that's the case where lawyers aren't going to take a case because they know the guy's guilty, like, they would never have lawyers.
No, you should have a lawyer advocate for minimizing their sentence.
But that's what a lot of defense attorneys end up doing.
Yeah, but if you know your client is guilty, should you be able to withhold that from the court?
That's a different question. I don't know.
This is a rabbit hole.
Okay, rabbit hole.
I'm gonna say 4 for this one. How about that?
Okay, so you almost you agree that they're just in the business to make money.
No, I agree with the first half of the sentence that they don't care about guilt or innocence. They are playing a role in this system. They're doing their function.
Okay, I'm putting a 1 because I don't think either of those are why people actually get into this line of work. And I think it kind of misrepresents it. Generally, the police make an arrest only when they are sure about who committed the crime.
Make an arrest?
Generally, the police make an arrest only when they are sure about who committed the crime.
I think they only like charges once they have a pretty good idea. But you can arrest. It's too easy to arrest people.
It's right. So I think this is just a difference of words. Like, are we talking about arresting, charging, probable cause? Like, what are we talking about? If they're saying arrest, yeah, it's very easy to arrest someone and you don't really need like that much evidence yet.
You need some probable.
Yeah, but it's like, I forget the language they use, but like it's like the lowish threshold for that one. And then you need a much higher threshold to lay a charge before it's going to go to the court.
Okay.
Which is not the same thing as being arrested.
So if it's just arrest, I think we both strongly disagree. Have you ever been arrested?
No, just pulled over for speeding.
Oh, that doesn't.
I know,
count.
but if you're asking about my contact with police, like that's the extent.
That's
of
the only you've never been in handcuffs in the back of a car. Like, even as like a youth,
wouldn't you know that?
Getting into trouble.
Wouldn't you know that? Like, you're asking, like, you've never been in the back of the police car. No.
I don't know.
Have you?
No, but I've known
Okay, well, then why would you think that I have? Okay, Ben.
Once I was in a park with some friends. And the park was closed. And this guy rolls up, turns on the lights. He's like, "What are you kids doing here?" We were literally just sitting in a park drinking strawberry milk. We were literally just drinking. I remember it so vividly because I think he expected to find us with alcohol because we were like 16 years old or something.
Was it spiked?
No, it was literally just we went to a convenience store and got strawberry milk. It's in Canada. It's like a pink jug of milk.
It should be illegal.
It's so delicious. It should be illegal.
It's gross. I actually don't like it. I like the color.
But I remember he just looked so disappointed. I can't remember if he was a cop or a security guard at the time. We were just freaked out. But it was pretty funny.
All right. Okay.
He didn't arrest
you. He did not arrest you. Got it. Many accident claims filed against insurance companies are phony. Many accident claims filed against insurance companies are phony.
Did I tell the pod when somebody rear-ended me, was a year or two ago? Like I was just stopped in traffic, and she just slams into the back of me, and I get out of the car, and I'm kind of like, oh, I feel like kind of jarred, like I didn't feel great, and she goes, I hope this isn't an insurance scam. She
What?
she said this about me.
She hit you.
I know. I'm like, lady, I didn't jump in front of your car. You just smashed into me.
Maybe she's doing insurance scam. That's a tell right there.
Her immediate reaction was like, are you pretending to be hurt to get money? I'm like, lady, I didn't ask for this. You hit me.
Oh my God.
It was super bizarre.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the statement?
So you have personal experience bias is what you're
saying?
I
do. Yeah, I do have a bias.
Many accident claims filed against insurance companies are phony.
Disagree? 2?
Okay. I strongly disagree.
I mean,
on what grounds am I saying this?
Some phony insurance claims
but
exist.
there's phony of everything. Like, that's just life. I'm not going around thinking many accident claims. They're all phony. Like, no. Okay. The defendant is often a victim of his own bad reputation. Also, just point that they always say he in all of these.
Yeah, well, like 90% of people in the criminal justice system are men, right?
Yeah, if we're talking about
something
violent
like
crimes, something like that. It's all the men's fault.
What was the statement?
The defendant is often a victim of his own bad reputation. A victim of your own bad reputation. I know, it's kind of confusing too. I agree. Like, okay, well, let's look at it this way. If you have a bad reputation because others hate you, and it's not necessarily because of what you did, but you just have a bad reputation, then like,
ooh,
do you agree that like they're a victim because people just see them poorly? That's how I interpret this sentence. But I would think yes, that like people can be victims of how other people perceive them, because they can just like pass judgment on based on someone's reputation and not on anything else.
Yeah, sometimes reputations are earned. If you have a reputation for stealing candy from babies, and then you're on trial for stealing candy from a baby, you deserve for that reputation to come into play here.
So do you strongly agree?
Put me as a 4.
Okay, I put the same.
I don't think that's what they're getting at.
Yeah.
But...
I don't think that's what they're getting at either, but that's how we interpret it. Okay, extenuating circumstances should not be considered. If a person commits a crime, then the person should be punished.
Oh, I think there needs to be at least a sliver of room for exceptional circumstances. But maybe put me a 2 instead of a 1.
I'm a 1. You have to consider everything.
But like, I just don't think there should be judicial discretion all over the place. I think most things should just be bound within constraints of...
Well, that's what there is now with minimum and maximum mandatory sentences.
Yeah. I think that's
but I think like just like at trials, the defense is allowed to present a bunch of mitigating factors to explain why and what was going wrong. I think that should be maintained. If the defendant committed a victimless crime like gambling or possession of marijuana, he should never be convicted. This was written in like 2010. So it's a little old because like possession of marijuana is not a crime in Canada currently. But just if you think of a victimless crime, let's say it's something that doesn't hurt anyone. I mean, that's a slippery slope because a lot of victimless crimes do trickle down.
Yeah.
But
then it shouldn't be a crime. So it's like a fallacy.
It says he shouldn't be convicted. But yeah, like it just shouldn't be a crime if it really isn't something that should be. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a weird one.
I don't like this one. Just put me a 3.
Yeah, I think I'll put the same because I can't agree or disagree. I think there should just be a policy or legislation change to fix the problem at the root. Mm-hmm. Defense lawyers are too willing to defend individuals they know are guilty.
5. 5.
I mean... That's their job, though. Like, this sentence is stupid.
So
defense lawyers
they're willing to do their job.
Do defend people that may be guilty. Yeah.
I think in some cases they know they're guilty and still defend them.
Yes, because they're defending them for their rights to make sure due process is followed and everything. There's nothing like wrong.
I'm more interested in the truth than the gamesmanship of the adversarial system.
It's not just gamesmanship. It's making sure everyone has the right to a fair trial and who's going to advocate for you.
You know what's fair? If someone is guilty of something, that they get prosecuted for it.
But you have to make sure that's done fairly and not just like without constraints or without oversight. That's why defense. Okay, we're just arguing now. Okay, I'm just putting a 3 because this sentence is. Nah.
Okay.
Police routinely lie to protect other police officers.
I still have friends and contacts
There's a lot of evidence that happens.
Sure.
And there's been increasing amounts of evidence that is happening increasingly, and it's getting more and more exposed and known to the public.
There's definitely there's a culture problem in policing.
An institutional problem.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess we do have to, I don't see how you don't strongly agree with this, right?
A 5 or a 4?
What was the statement again?
Police routinely lie to protect other police officers.
I mean, it is pretty endemic. Is that the word?
Yeah, it's pretty. It's prolific, but I still feel like with any of these questions, I'm not giving a wholehearted 5 because it happens.
You've been
all the
given
time.
1s though.
Yeah, but that's kind of the opposite. That's like saying there's room for doubt, so I give it a 1 because I can't.
No, you're strongly disagreeing, not abstaining.
Yeah, I guess so. Well,
all right, put me as a 4. Put me as a 4 for this one.
Okay.
I think there are systemic issues in policing.
Yep.
Police unions too.
Once a criminal, always a criminal.
Well, factually, no, but prior criminal history is one of the
future,
is the best predictor of future criminal activity.
But that alone does not mean that someone is sentenced to a life of crime on their own admission. Like that's just not.
Yeah, definitely not.
So you can look at it one way, but it not mean that everyone who does a crime is going to continue crime. So for that reason, I can't agree. That's just.
But give me a 2 just because I feel like that truism is so important.
Okay. I'm saying a 1 because I feel like this is an assumption that someone's innate nature is destined by one single action. And I don't think that's reasonable to conclude that they're always going to commit crimes and be guilty of crimes in the future.
That's not reasonable. Hey, if we're being honest, if I'm sitting on a jury and I'm on the fence about someone's guilt or innocence and they have like 20 prior convictions.
Sometimes they don't introduce those.
Crime.
Sometimes they literally don't introduce those, so you're not biased.
But I would be lying if I said that wouldn't bias me.
Yeah.
And I think most people would be lying if they said that. And that's what this is trying to get at. Yeah.
Okay, you love this one. Lawyers will do whatever it takes, even lie, to win a case.
I think that is true.
I think they will twist the story to favor their client, but that's the adversarial system.
This isn't like disparaging lawyers. You're right. This is just a consequence of the adversarial system.
Yeah. The adversarial system, meaning like there's two parties, the defense and the prosecution, that argue to come to, they both present their own versions of truths. Whereas in the inquisitorial system, it's like totally it's the opposite, that there's no two parties arguing. It's one small panel or one single judge deciding what the truth is. So it's just a difference in like a culture of guilt finding.
Put me down as a 4.
A 4.
I'm coming off very anti-lawyer here, I think.
Yeah, stop that. Like you gotta, Ben, like you.
I'm just mad. We pay lawyers too much.
Okay, I'm putting a 2 because yes, they do, but I don't think I could be like, okay, whatever. Criminals.
How many more of these are there?
We have a few more, so let's try and go.
Okay, let's go quickly.
Okay, criminals should be caught and convicted by any means necessary.
Strongly disagree.
Why?
Because again, I am very sympathetic to the idea of false convictions or infringing on people's rights just to catch criminals. We could just surveillance everybody and catch criminals all the time.
We could just proactively put everyone in prison.
Yeah.
There's some people that would like that, actually.
100% success rate.
Yeah, woo! Okay, a prior record of conviction is the best indicator of a person's guilt in the present case.
Not of their guilt, but like it's the best predictor you have, like
it's a factor to consider, and researchers do, or intake assessments do, and parole officers do, consider how many past
there's a real issue here. Like, something can be statistically true or true in like a general sense, but not something that means it's necessarily true in this one case.
Yes.
Right?
So
put me a 3 here.
Yeah.
We're waffling.
I'm kind of neutral for the same reason. I think it should be considered, but it's not the best indicator of your guilt in the current case.
In any one specific case, it's definitely not.
Okay.
So maybe we should even...
Actually, I'm changing mine to 2.
Yeah, me too. Two.
Copy me. Can't copy.
Copying your homework.
Copy my homework. Okay. Rich individuals are almost never convicted of their crimes.
That's not true.
But... there's probably research out there that has like people who are more well off are more likely to get off on charges.
You're more likely to be able to pay for a successful defense. Mm-hmm. You are more likely to live within a society and a justice system that criminalizes the behavior of poor people more than it criminalizes the behavior of rich people. And you have more friends in high places. So like all these biases and systemic issues exist. But if you're talking about a rich person committing a crime as defined within that system, what was the statement again?
Rich individuals are almost never convicted of crimes. I mean, like...
crimes they commit?
Of their crimes. So, yes. If rich people are being tried for their crimes, they're almost never convicted. Is that true? Do you agree or disagree? I mean,
This is like an empirical question, right? Couldn't we...
okay, I'm sure there's evidence out there that's like rich people are like less likely to be found guilty. I'm sure that exists for sure. But it's also not true that they're like never convicted. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you could find that in the research.
Make me a 2.
I put the same for the same reason. But we're like kind of word mincing, whereas I think this is supposed to get at just like your immediate feelings. But here we are overthinking things. Okay.
We don't immediately think.
If a defendant is a member of a gang, he or she is definitely guilty of the crime.
Again, it's not like a definite guilt thing, but it's like prior involvement in a criminal organization.
I mean, it
is
depends.
An aggravating factor.
It depends. Is the crime a gang-related crime? Because what are we talking about here? If we're just talking about any crime and they just happen to be caught up because they were like at the store, just because they're in a gang, they're guilty? No. It depends on the context of the crime and the relationship of that gang to
they just went to the store to get strawberry milk.
Maybe. So
right,
I mean,
a 2.
I'm putting a 1 because that alone is not evidence. Minorities use the, in quotations, race issue only when they are guilty.
What?
Minorities use the, in quotations, race issue only when they are guilty.
What does that even...
I think
if
it's
a defendant
like,
is guilty, they
they play the race card, I think is what this question is trying to get at.
What's the race card in the context of being? I don't even understand.
Yeah.
I
think there's...
This is like a sort of like a dog whistle.
Yeah. The way I interpret what they're trying to do here is like get at people with really conservative views who think that people are just kind of using their minority status as some kind of like victimization card. But I don't really know what, different people are going to read this because they like actually agree with this line of thinking. So we're trying to figure out what the line of thinking is in order to like decide.
Yeah, read it one more time.
Minorities use the, in quotation, race issue only when they are guilty.
Yeah, strongly disagree.
Yeah.
If I'm even understanding
the question. I know, it's a little, okay. When it is the suspect's word against the police officers, I believe the police.
What if I just don't believe anybody?
What if I need all of the evidence to review in the case? And I don't think you can just blanket say that one side, if you will, is, accurate or correct.
Is the police's position rooted in evidence or just what they're saying?
I think this is just word against word, so there's no evidence. It's just, yeah. So, I mean, we've seen evidence of that word being not correct and accurate. There's been a lot of that recently with police misconduct. So I think, like, if anything, that's opened people's eyes to how you can't just blanket trust what police says. There's a lot of trust and verify. I mean, I still believe in that, generally speaking, but I don't think we can just kind of do these blanket things of like good guys versus bad guys that kind of society has conditioned.
I think it's just too blanket a statement to just be like trust one over the other when they're playing. Just put as a neutral, like 3 then.
Okay. Men are more likely to be guilty of crimes than women.
Statistically speaking?
This is true.
Yeah.
This is true. Even though there's way less women volume-wise who are charged or convicted, even when you get to that conviction phase and controlling for everything, women are still less likely to be found guilty of the crime.
Yeah.
And this is like just the statistics.
Are we getting hung up on thinking about it this way though? Because
it's going to do us a disservice.
Because you can't really reduce that to like the individual unit of analysis, right?
Yeah, I know. This is just like assuming what biases you have for gender and saying one gender is more likely to do this. So if we answer it in that biased way, it's going to think we're more biased, but we're really grounding it in like, no, that's just factually the case that women are less likely to be found guilty once it gets to court. So I don't know. What do you want to put? A 3?
Give me a 4.
Okay. I mean, I'll put a 4 too, because that's just the truth.
Sure.
It's not just an assumption. It is grounded in evidence. The large number of African Americans currently in prison is an example of the innate criminality of that subgroup. So this is another one that clearly just, makes you want to. It's getting at people who think that someone is born with a type of criminal behavior that gives them no room to kind of do anything different. So obviously we strongly disagree with that one. And if we are talking about the overrepresentation of minority or indigenous groups like in Canada in prison, that's a problem. That's a huge problem.
And there's a lot of societal, institutional, historical factors for those statistical truths of overrepresentation.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. It is not explained solely by a person's heritage or background. It's explained by institutional factors, social conditions, and this is an ongoing problem, like, everywhere in the world, but specifically in Canada with like indigenous overrepresentations in prisons. I remember I used to like work on these numbers when I worked in corrections, but like indigenous women represent something like 33% of the women offender population in federal prisons in Canada, but represent like, what is it, 2.5% if we're just talking about women?
Yeah.
Of people.
So these
in
people
Canada
are hugely
total.
overrepresented.
Yeah.
These certain groups are hugely overrepresented in the criminal justice system.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can control for factors like socioeconomic status,
location, access to resources, education, low income, all of these things, then so
it's not anything inherent about, there's like there's a lot of history in criminology of trying to arrive at like sort of like biological or like inherent like sort of explanations of criminal behavior. It's all junk science, right?
And those are constantly disproven, especially if you look at like critical criminology, then there's a lot of research there about why that's just like not a reasonable take. There is no such thing as innate criminality. All right, so we are strongly disagree.
Okay. How many more questions?
Okay, just 5 more.
Okay.
A black man on trial with a...
Are they all about race now?
Some of them are, because it's a bias. A black man on trial with a predominantly white jury will always be found guilty. There is studies on this, and yeah, racism is responsible for some of this, yes.
And there's a reason why lawyers try to make the jury look like their defendant. Right.
Why the defense counsel tries to make it, and the prosecution wants the opposite.
And it's sort of human nature to identify with people who look more like you and are more of your group or characteristics you have.
Yeah.
I still disagree with the statement, but yeah, there is some.
So would you say 4? Like you agree, but you're not going to say that like, yes, 100% of the time that happens?
Oh, no, I think I'm still inclined to disagree. Just with the sorry, what does it say?
I'll read it again. A black man on trial with a predominantly white jury will always be found guilty.
Yeah, no, I disagree, but I'll do it a 2 instead of 1 because I recognize that there is bias that happens when the jury isn't representative or...
But doesn't that make you a 4?
No, because I overall disagree, but realize there is some room to...
Okay, maybe we're interpreting it differently.
I'm interpreting it differently, saying white people will always convict black people. I disagree with that statement.
Oh, so I actually agree with that statement. I think that's what happens when you have a recipe of a jury that does not look like the defendant. And I think that's supported in research. So I'm putting it at a 4 because I'm not going to say always. But I think I do agree that that's what happens. It's a consequence.
There is bias, but does that bias outweigh...
The facts of the case? I mean, we don't have the facts of the case. We're just talking about...
I think we look at it similarly. We're just maybe interpreting it a little
all right, let's just... Okay.
Or are we showing our own implicit bias here?
All right. Minority suspects are likely to be guilty more often than not. Okay. This is a...
No.
Strongly disagree. If a witness refuses to take a lie detector test, that's not what the fib finder said.
Yeah, if they refuse the fib finder, then I agree.
If a witness refuses to take a lie detector test, it is always because he or she is hiding something.
No, strongly.
So lie detector tests are not really admissible, but
strongly disagree.
Okay. Two more. Defendants who change their story are almost always guilty. This is interesting because Alex Murdaugh changed his story.
Almost always guilty?
I'm strongly disagree.
2. Make me a 2.
I'm like, no. There's so many reasons why someone's story can change. Yes. That's not evidence to me of their guilt.
But it could be meaningful or signifying something. So I'm a 2.
Yeah. You just want to know why they changed it and understand it. And I think that can help. Okay, last question. Mm-hmm. Famous people are often considered to be above the law.
Often considered by who? Themselves?
I don't know.
I guess I would say they often consider themselves.
Or maybe it's considered by the public that they don't have to face the consequences of the justice system because they're so famous, so they can get away with it.
Wesley Snipes didn't pay his taxes.
He's above the law. So
he went to jail.
Oh, okay. I don't know that case. Sorry, didn't watch that trial.
I do not think celebrities are above the law.
But
more than them having money and net connections and stuff makes them better able to navigate. But the question
isn't, do you think they're above the law? It's just that people consider them to be above the law. So do you think that socially...
I'm people.
Okay, sure. So
I don't know. No, I disagree.
So 2?
Sure.
Okay. I have our results.
Oh, good.
The results are coming in. Ready?
Results are Ben is a boomer. He wants to punish people.
Okay. So here's the results.
Yeah.
There was a min and a max score that we could have had. And I took the study mean, which was the researchers who originally did this on 2 different groups of participants. And I stacked our scores beside that because that's the only reference category we really have here. So I scored a 54 out of a possible 145. Just note that the minimum was 29. Okay. And Ben scored a 70 out of a possible 145. And the study from which this quiz was based on, the mean of that study was 88.
So your average person scored 88. The higher the number, the more of a bias they have in favor of the prosecution.
So the higher your score, the more likely you have an implicit bias to just want to convict.
Interesting. So even though I answered in some ways that were I thought leading towards a more favorable towards prosecution, I still scored pretty significantly below the average.
You did. And I think that's because there was a lot of questions that we absolutely shot down about innate criminality and, that we immediately saw as being biased.
So it's pretty depressing, though, if that's the difference between us and the average.
I know. But I think this gap between us and the average is explained by what you didn't like me bringing up, which is honestly just going to lecture or after lecture for many years in criminology class. Because a lot of what we just went over in a very simplified way is what gets drilled into you in first year criminology about social circumstances and other factors relating to why people get involved in crime in the first place. And I think think it comes from a place of like compassion and understanding the human existence and the struggles that can give way to people having a more, like, I think empathetic is the wrong word. I think it's just like having more context about how people's lives work when they're not presented with, you know, great opportunities from the second they were born. I think that that's a really good thing to learn about. And I think that's where kind of we've learned so much of that we like don't, that's just like common sense to us, but it's not.
Yeah. And sorry, I should be more clear about what I didn't like about this idea of like, if you have a background in criminology or an education in that, obviously you would have some expertise and presumably more knowledge than the average person about the criminal justice system or theories of punishment. But to me, I feel like there's a trap some people fall into. It's like, just because I'm an expert and study this in school makes my opinion on things more valid. Whereas like, I think what's so interesting about criminology and studying the criminal justice system is that like, there is no right answer to like what the purpose of a justice system should be, right? It's a much more subjective question of values of your society, policy, government. Like there is no, like, I just recall, like, it often seemed the case in university, we would just like, there was almost this attitude that like, because we had the data points, like we knew what was right or like what works in crime and justice or punishment. But it seems to me it is a much more philosophical and like societal conversation about what you want your justice system to do. Is it about an expression of societal values and punishing things as that sort of collective expression or symbolic value? Or is it about, you know, oh, the purpose is rehabilitation, reintegration? Because like the data points that we are aware of can help advocate for or argue different positions there, but they don't say one position is right or wrong, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I remember that too, like our just learning about this stuff through a critical criminology lens, which generally means like using sociology as a lens to look at all of these factors, which generally leans towards having more understanding towards vulnerable groups and their position and trying to remove emotion from it unless that emotion helps you be compassionate towards those in less favorable positions. So that's kind of the background of critical criminology / sociology.
Yeah, a lot of just like questioning of like how certain behaviors
and
or
less about
people
punishment.
even get labeled and defined as criminal or criminals.
Like social labeling theory and all that kind of stuff, or broken windows theory.
Which is super interesting and stuff I'm all interested in, right? But just when it comes to your more sort of like public policy, what's the point of punishment? Should someone go to jail or not? Just because you have that sort of background context and knowledge about the criminal justice system doesn't make your opinion about what the justice system should do is more valid.
Yeah, and everyone has a different perspective. I do think that because of my background that I am more inclined to be like, let's not just do this for the purpose of punishment, because I feel like just going gung-ho on retribution or vengeance is not the kind of society that I want to live in. If like we followed every philosophy in life, like let's get them, I think like the outcome of that type of world is not one that I like the picture of. I much prefer a society or a justice system where you're focused on reintegration and rehabilitation and giving people a benefit of the doubt. But also that doesn't mean let everyone run amok after like committing terrible violent offenses. I think there has to be a balance struck, but you want to make sure that that balance and any incarceration or punishment is struck because it was achieved through a fair and impartial system as much as is reasonably possible. And it's impossible to remove all bias. There's tons of studies on how like no one is ever not biased. We have implicit bias all the time. Juries have implicit bias. They just like try and do their best to remove that as much as possible. But, you know, it's not perfect. And I don't think there is a justice system that is perfect.
No, and I am generally aligned with the idea of like, I want evidence-based policy that just yields the best outcomes. And usually that is thinking about reintegration or rehabilitation and not that sort of more punitive lens. But I guess like to give an example, I think like anyone could agree with, like there could be crimes that happen where the punishing it, let's say someone murdered somebody. They murdered them for a very specific reason. That's the only person in their life they'll ever murder. You have no reason to think that person will ever murder another person.
Do you want to use Alex Murdaugh as an example?
No, because I don't think he's a good example. And this is a bit of a goofy example, but like I think it makes the point.
Okay.
If you have no reason to think that person would ever commit any sort of act of violence again, why are you punishing them for having murdered somebody? You're not, by locking them away and incapacitating them, it's not like you're preventing any other further violence from happening. If you know there's really no reasonable...
But you will never know. I mean, I don't know if I agree with that. Like,
you have to accept the premise of this, right?
A person who just committed a violent crime, even even if it was a crime of passion and it's the only person they would murder, still needs to be rehabilitated. You can't just be like, oh, we trust you're totally never going to do this again unless you get another wife. Let's say he murdered his wife. Like, you still need rehabilitation.
I'm just saying, there are cases where people commit crimes where it is so specific to those circumstances that there is not really legitimate or reasonable grounds to believe they will commit a violent act again, potentially. That scenario could exist.
But if you give that person no consequences, might they feel differently?
This is my point. You are still punishing that person, not because of evidence-based decision-making about trying to reintegrate or rehabilitate them. You're making it because you think, as a society, we've decided that certain acts needs to be denounced, that there needs deterrence. To be some symbolic value to it too, right?
It's deterrence and also denouncing it to that offender. Because like deterrence meaning you're, by prosecuting this person and sentencing them to 25 years to life, you're telling other people, hey, don't do this, or you will suffer this consequence. But it's also telling the person who did it that, like, now you're going to sit in prison, and think about what you did. So it does a few things at once. It's not just like one principle of the justice system here. But I hear you that inherent in some of this is the desire to punish someone for their actions, even if you generally know, although we can never be sure, that they're unlikely to do the same thing again.
Yeah.
But if we just let those people in those circumstances, no prison for you because we don't think you're going to do it, what does that say to everyone else in society who's like, I really want to murder my wife? So, yeah, there's a lot of lessons.
Not that deterrence often works when it comes to crimes of this nature,
You're not wrong,
right?
but I also don't think removing all facets of it is helpful either.
Yeah, it's difficult to prove. There's no real world experiment where you remove all the deterrent factor.
We can't do A/B testing.
Yeah, there's you can't prove a null hypothesis or something. So you want to be on a jury now or what?
Do you think you'd be a good jury member?
After this, I don't think so.
I think I'd enjoy it, but I'm not sure that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I truly do.
Okay.
I think being like a little too heavy on thinking like, well, what about this and what about this and what about doubt? I think it's a little too much because I think the way the system is supposed to work is just 12 people kind of almost, I don't want to say casually. I do believe that they are carefully considering the evidence, but it's almost just like 12 average people, which is the point of it, who don't have a bunch of background in like studying this. And that is a question they will ask you. Like, have you worked in criminology or in the field? Or have you been a lawyer, for example? I think like the point of the justice system is that you're just supposed to have people like you, or as close as possible, evaluate the circumstances and make a decision. You're not supposed to have like overthinkers on it.
Average person is pretty stupid though, right?
Okay, well, that's not what I meant to say. Ben, that's not what I mean.
But you know what I mean? Like it's, wouldn't you feel way more comfortable leaving yourself in the hands of someone with some knowledge and background and expertise?
Like a judge?
Like a judge.
Well, you can, I mean, I don't know about every jurisdiction or crime, but in some cases you can elect for a judge trial, but maybe you don't want that if the law is pretty clear that like you're going to get 20 years, right? So it's a strategic decision, but I just still find it so fascinating that ultimately the fate of someone's criminal conviction is often left up to 12 regular people. And I just think it's fascinating. And if I ever went back to school, maybe I'd go back into this field. I just remember thinking, like, this is so fucking interesting. But, here we are on the internet instead.
Okay.
All right, everyone. I hope you thought that was interesting.
was long.
Yeah. But, comment down below if you've ever served on a jury and or if you feel like you'd be a good jury member or if you wouldn't like it. There's a lot of people who are like, I do not want this to be my life. And I can totally understand that.
I think that's probably most people probably want to get out of jury duty.
Yeah. And I think the defendant doesn't want those type of people on their jury. Or anyone, really. You don't want someone on the jury who really doesn't want to be there.
Can we replace the jury with AI?
Oh, interesting question. Imagine, this is all terrifying, but just imagine that AI gets to a place where it can download all the facts of the case and come up with like a reasonable doubt quantified number about the probability of guilt and then come up with thresholds at which you can like cut off when someone should be convicted.
Don't stop there. That artificial intelligence, you could probably just use that to do predictive modeling of if someone is likely to commit a crime in the future.
Recidivism.
You could punish them before they even commit the crime.
Wow. You can incapacitate them.
And Tom Cruise could help arrest these people and bring them to justice.
He could arrest them without asking any questions, knowing they're guilty.
Have you seen Minority Report?
No.
Okay.
Or like maybe a long time ago.
Is that the name of it?
I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
All right, everyone. We're happy to be back. We're back, baby.
You would like that movie.
I feel like I've seen it. I'd have to see a trailer again to remind myself.
You just don't like Tom Cruise. He's kind of a dork.
Kind of, a little bit.
He was good in that fighter jet movie, Top Gun.
The fighter jet movie?
I watched Top Gun a while ago.
That's good. I'm proud of you.
On our break, I watched Top Gun.
Good for you.
Feel good movie. Jets go fast. Burr, burr.
All right, everybody. Okay, we'll be back next week, I think, on The Last of Us.
That'll be the last of PodLogical.
No, it won't, Ben.
That'll be the end of season 2.
Okay, all right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a fantastic Taco Tuesday, and we'll see you all later. Bye.
Bye.